Our next presenter, Mariella Torres. And the title of her presentation, Grandfathers and Their Eldest Granddaughter. Mariella.
I stacked the crowd on purpose. So this is a story about two men who come from completely different backgrounds, different countries, different educational backgrounds. And yet despite all of those differences, they shared a bond that crossed oceans. And that was their love for me, their eldest granddaughter. I was born in 1980, I was conceived in Peru in 1988 and born in Burlington in 1989. So I've always been bridging divides, even from before birth. This is a picture of my lovely mother. Being the eldest granddaughter, I expanded so many people's identities. And it's something that I've really been thinking about recently, is that every single person in this room, by your mere existence, by you just being born, you expanded someone's identity. For me, being the oldest, I gave my mom the mother title. I gave my grandfather the grandfather title. And every single one of you had those ripples as well. My grandfather, Lance Paul Mead, was born in 1934 in New York City. He was an only child, and he moved a couple of times from New York City to Connecticut and then to Burlington, Vermont, where he serendipitously met my grandmother at Burlington High School, which is now the Edmonds School right up the road. He graduated from the University of Vermont with a major in geology, and that is my mom, who was also at graduation, and she is the eldest of 4. Mi abuelo, Gabino Torres, was born in 1924 in Cusco, Peru. He was one of 4 children, and when he was a young boy, his mother wasn't able to afford much for him, and so he was sent to the Andes Mountains to herd sheep for another family. It was tough for him, but he persevered, and he ended up having a family of his own, one of 4 boys, and this is a wonderful picture because there's not a ton of pictures from that time. And so you can see on the far left is my grandfather with my dad in his lap, and the far right is my grandmother with her 3rd child. One of the things that I've also been thinking about is just how big the universe is and how wild these 2 boys coming from completely different backgrounds, the fact that their timelines could merge and the fact that the universe could bring them together in that way, I don't think that they could have even dreamed that that was possible when they were growing up in New York City and Vermont and Peru. This is one of my favorite photos because the merging of timelines started with my parents. And so I'd like you to take a moment and see if you can spot the Peruvian in this very Vermont. They got married at Blueberry Hill Inn in Vermont. My grandfather loved us in a very adventurous Vermont way. He'd show up at the house uninvited with a canoe on the top of his roof, usually with safety out the window to like my mom's dismay. Luckily I was wearing a life jacket in this. And he would bring us on lots of adventures. He would also forget snacks and hydration and all the other things. But the beautiful thing about having him so close by was we got to experience seasons with him, apple picking being one of them. He was known for his cowboy boots and his very large selection of hats. And I used to love wearing his hats, but pretended that I didn't because I didn't want to let on how much it meant to me. He loved in a very out loud way. He was very emotionally connected, and he was always very present. He would be at every recital. He'd be hiding in bushes, taking photos. He would be at every airport drop-off. Even though we never told him that we were actually leaving or the date and time, he would find ways to figure it out. They had a log cabin, or they have a log cabin in Brandon, Vermont, and it was the epicenter of all of our annual family traditions. We would celebrate birthdays and holidays, and to this day, the furniture remains the same, and so it is this museum of all the memories of my childhood in the hills of Vermont. Mi abuelo, there was a language barrier, but he figured out early on, the best way to love us was to feed the picky eaters. And so he would go early in the morning to make sure that we had our favorite tamales. And he would go to battle with my dad at lunches to make sure that we got the glass bottled Coca-Cola, even though we ended up getting lots and lots of cavities because of it. We lived with my grandfather in the summer, and so we spent a lot of time in the back patio playing with the guinea pigs that would then become food, playing with the stray cats that would appear from different rooftops, the chickens, the dogs that they were always adopting. And during the days, we would always go on different adventures. But no matter what we were doing, we would always make sure to come home for lunch. Almuerzo. It was a very important time of the day, and we'd get back and he'd be pacing around, so excited to see us, but also just really excited that we survived the day, because my mom was the one with us for the whole summer, and my dad would come for the last 2 weeks. And it was very visible with the redhead and then the 3 Peruvian children, so we were kind of a target. Thinking about things later on in life, I realized that we spent a lot of time away from the house, and my grandfather would spend time home. But what I realize now, what we were doing is we were grounding in our ancestral knowledge. And it was such a special time. My grandfather came from nothing and worked very hard his whole life, but he achieved his dream. He had a home for us, he provided food, and he provided a summer where we could root into our history and our culture and get closer to him. And a lot of the photos are mantelpiece type photos. We didn't have a lot of the candids. So there was the language barrier, there was also a hearing impairment issue. But he was a very stoic man, and without fail, at the end of every summer, he'd bring us to the airport and he would weep by the fact that we wouldn't see each other maybe for another 2 years. Both of my grandfathers have since passed away, but I carry them with me every single day. Their love gives me courage and gives me so much strength, and I'm so proud and grateful to be their granddaughter.